My favourite sayings is good judgment comes from experience, and experience comes from bad judgment. The COVID-19 inquiry's findings, chaired by Baroness Hallett, found that the UK was ill-prepared and lacked resilience, having prepared for the wrong pandemic. And key findings from the external research included inadequate test, trace and isolate systems, as mentioned by the Minister, the Noble Lady Merrin. The Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, admitted that the report confirmed the UK was underprepared for the pandemic, with failures in process planning and policy across all four nations. And Jeremy Hunt, who served as Health Secretary during the early years leading to the pandemic, acknowledged the report's sensible recommendations and admitted to being part of a groupthink. My Lords, I was fortunate to be able to participate in several ways during the pandemic. The first example was as Chancellor of the University of Birmingham, a tenure I held from July 2014 to July 2024. And when the pandemic started and had lockdown in March, soon after that I was approached by Avi Lazarou, the Consul General for the Midlands for South Africa and a fellow member of the Guild of Entrepreneurs, soon to become a livery company, and he's CEO of a major testing company, Prenetics, and he said, the Premier League football season has been suspended, and we have an idea that if we test the players, the coaches, everyone involved, without spectators, we test them regularly, we will be able to resume and complete the season. The problem is, he said, the government is not listening. And we've identified the University of Birmingham as a very great expert in testing, Professor Alan McNally, who, by the way, happened to go on and head the Nightingale Labs, is that if Professor McNally approves of our idea, maybe, and endorses it, maybe the government will listen. So I made the introduction to the professor, to the head of our medical school, and government then listened, thanks to his recommendation, and the Premier League season continued, televised, no spectators, and what happened was everyone was tested on a regular basis. Anyone who tested positive isolated, everyone else carried on and played the game. The season was completed by the 1st of August 2020. Other sports continued and followed the system, and if you notice, throughout the whole pandemic, we had the football season. And I don't think many people are aware of what I have just told noble lords just now. And it, to me, opened up the power of regular testing to pick up asymptomatic COVID cases. I was appointed Vice President, President-elect of the CBI, the Confederation of British Industry, in June 2019. I was the first entrepreneur to be in that position, the first relatively younger president of the CBI, the first normally not grey-haired FTSE 100 chair to be president of the CBI. Little did I realise that I would be president through the biggest global crisis since the Second World War, the pandemic. And I think what I realized very soon is the CBI is wrongly described as a lobbying organization. I've never respected that description. To me, it's about continually identifying problems, usually well before government is even aware of them, and then instead of going to the government with a begging bowl, finding and offering solutions which can be acted upon at speed. So problem, solution, action. And to me, that is the essence of what entrepreneurship is about. And it's also about collaboration, about government and business working closely together. And the best example of that collaboration, and I have to give credit to the Prime Minister at the time, Boris Johnson, was appointing Kate Bingham, now Dame Kate Bingham, to lead the Vaccines Task Force in May 2020. With the first vaccination on the 8th of December 2020, the task force transformed the model of how government, industry and academia and the NHS can work collaboratively together to accelerate innovation, and this enabled the UK to become the first country in the world to sign an advance purchase agreement for the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine. Next, the government also supported the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, developed by Oxford University in partnership with AstraZeneca based in Cambridge, who in turn collaborated with the Serum Institute of India, owned by Cyrus and Ardar Poonawalla, good friends of mine and fellow Zoroastrian Parsis. That one company, SII, produced 2 billion doses of the vaccine. So this was also an example of collaboration, but also cross-border. And then, of course, the other huge impressive was the pandemic being dynamic regulation. Regulation at speed. The MHRA approving vaccines in months, when normally it would take years. And then the appointment of Nadeem Zahawi as COVID vaccine deployment minister was crucial, and I worked closely with him and saw how effective that was. But, my lords, government doesn't always listen and didn't always listen. I learnt about cheap and fast lateral flow tests that people can test themselves with results almost instantaneously that were being developed in the United States. And in August 2020, I started bringing that to the notice of the government. Every time I made this recommendation, here in this House or in other interactions with government and the NHS, I was battered away. But of course, as an entrepreneur, you never give up. And I remember very clearly on the 12th of November, in our virtual sitting of the House of Lords, I asked the noble Lord, the Minister, the Health Minister, Lord Bethell at the time, I said that Sir John Bell, the Regius Professor of Medicine at Oxford University, who initially had been against lateral flow tests, said that they were inexpensive, easy to use, and when used systematically could reduce transmission by 90%. And I said that they're picking up 75% of positive cases and 95% of the most infectious cases. I asked the Minister, when can we have millions of these tests deployed by the NHS, care homes, schools, universities, airports, factories, offices, workplaces, theatres, sports grounds, so that we could get our economy firing on all cylinders again? And do you know what the reply was? And I quote Lord Bethell, "As ever, I'm inspired by the noble Lord's passion for the subject. He has totally won the argument in this matter because we are putting into the field millions of tests as he recommended and continues to champion. The pilot in Liverpool is extremely exciting. The tests themselves are proving both easy to administer and accurate in their diagnosis. We're working on ways to use these tests in a mass testing capacity. University and social care are two use cases that we have prioritised, and we're looking at using the lessons of Liverpool in other areas. In all matters, we continue to be inspired by the noble Lord." My gosh, well, I shall frame that. My lords, the reality is government did listen. But it took several months before free lateral flow tests were eventually made available to all business and citizens. In fact, they came to be used so widely that we ran out of them in December 2021 and January 2022. Oxford University carried out a study between April and June 2021 of 200 schools. It covered 200,000 pupils and 20,000 staff. Half of them were following the bubble rule. If you remember, at one time there were millions of school children isolating. The other half regularly used lateral flow tests, with only those who tested positive isolating, everyone else carrying on and attending school, children and staff alike. And it showed that less than 2% in each of those two cohorts were actually infected. The difference was the ones who used lateral flow tests didn't miss out school, whereas the others had to go out in bubbles and miss schools. I put it to the government, and I wonder if the noble lady, the Minister, would agree with this. Had the government listened in August 2022 and acted rapidly to introduce rapid lateral flow tests, perhaps we could have avoided lockdowns 2 and 3. And what's more, the cost of providing these tests, as I will prove, would have been minuscule compared with the £400 billion the government spent on saving our businesses and the economy, let alone people's mental health, as noble Lady Tyler mentioned, children losing out on time in school, university students missing out, the health issues of people missing out on operations, lives sadly lost, waiting lists of millions that continue to this day. And we experienced, as I said, shortages of these cases. And of course, the plan was to use millions of these. And when they were rolled out, there were skeptics. They said, oh, they'll cause false positives. And the reality was that these shows that they were sent off to laboratories to test with PCR tests. 89% of those came with the same positive result. So that was a false scare. So the first national lockdown, March 23rd to June 1st, 2020, my lords, I don't think we could have avoided that lockdown. The world didn't know what was going on. We were hit with a huge shock. But the second lockdown from November the 5th, 2020 to December 2nd, 2020, and the third national lockdown from January 6th, 2021 to March 29th, 2021, those could, I believe, have been avoided, and all the implications that I've outlined. And what was the cost of these lateral flow tests? From 2021-2022, from April 1st, 2022, for that one-year period, the cost was £16 billion. Now you can buy them at retail for less than £2 each. So what is this 2 billion tests being provided at £15 billion, compared with almost £400 billion of the total cost of COVID-19 measures. And my lords, the last example I give you, my wife is South African, we have a home in Cape Town. Alan Windey, the Premier of the Free State, of the Western Province, the most successful province in South Africa, he provided me with data throughout the pandemic. That data was way, way better than any of the data I received over here from the NHS. Why? Because they had experience, because of the AIDS pandemic earlier, of dealing with it. They had some of the best epidemiologists and virologists in the world, including Professor Salim Abdul Karim, who's become a good friend of mine. And when in top medical scientists in Britain came under fire for ignoring the expertise of these great South African scientists with the Omicron variant when it was identified in November 2021. And South Africa has highly sophisticated genomic surveillance capability for COVID, which is why both the Omicron beta variants were first identified in South Africa. But instead of listening to those scientists, we didn't. And if I just quote Angelica Coetzee, chair of the South African Medical Association, she was among those who reported Omicron as very, very mild. And then South Africa angrily condemned the travel restrictions immediately slapped on it and other southern African countries. Professor Tulia d'Oliveira of the Centre for Epidemic Response and Innovation said the UK, after praising us for discovering the variants, then put out this absolutely stupid travel ban, and that is how we treated it. SAGE dismissed these, and when I brought this to the notice of the Health Secretary at the time, he listened to me, and I said, please don't be scared by Omicron. It spreads like wildfire, but it does not cause deaths. The NHS scared him. We had a go slow in December 2021 and January 2022. Christmas was ruined for hospitality. It was completely unnecessary, and the gloomiest predictions for Omicron were shown to have been wide off the mark. So, my lords, I conclude. The lessons learnt, whether it's with vaccines, whether it's the Premier League carrying on, whether it's lateral flow testing, whether it's the Omicron and not listening to experts around the world, I hope that we learn from these lessons from the biggest global crisis since the Second World War, the COVID-19 pandemic.